Hello, everyone. If you can hear us, type llama in the chat. I am Noelia, and I will be your host today. And with me, I have Megan Biffert. I am very excited. I can see that there's people from everywhere in the chat. We are so excited, even from frigid Minnesota. Hopefully, you're warm inside. And yes, they can hear us. There's the llamas in the chat. Awesome. Cool. So before we fully get started, I just wanted to remind you that if you have any questions, please type them in the chat. Type question in all caps followed by your question. That way it's easier for me to find them. And we will be answering as many questions as we can today. If they are relevant to what Megan is doing at the moment, I will ask it then. If not, I will be saving it for a Q&A at the end. We also suggest that you subscribe to our channel because we are having way more live demos coming up. So if you subscribe and hit the notification button, you will get notified of when we're going live. And share this link with your artist friends or just friends in general so that they can come join us too. And if you get a chance, we would really appreciate your feedback. So I will be dropping the feedback link in our chat. And with that being said, Megan, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe do a sketchbook flip through?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Megan and really excited to be here. It's also dumping snow where we're at too. So Tacoma people were in the same weather as you. But yeah, I started an illustration business about a year ago, and a large part of that has been drawing houses and house portraits for people. I like drawing a variety of subjects, and I've drawn a lot since I was a kid. But houses really came up because I've just enjoyed architecture, and whenever I would travel with my family, we would look at the different styles of houses in the area, and I wanted to try drawing and painting them. And homes mean a lot to us, and so then people would reach out and ask me to draw like their childhood home, or their parents were moving and they wanted a portrait of their home to remember. And so it's just kind of become a niche subject I really enjoy. And I meet other people who really enjoy houses, drawing and painting houses too. And so that's kind of what led to today. Etcher and Noelia reached out and said, hey, are you interested in showing how you draw a house portrait? So that's what we're going to do today, at least the first part. Today we're just doing the sketch outlines or the pen lines I put down for a house portrait. And then I think in March, we're going to do a mini workshop of adding the watercolor to those lines. So yeah, we were talking, Noelia and I were talking earlier about sketchbooks and how some people are very orderly, and they all look like these beautiful finished subjects, and mine don't look like that. So I had to tag sticky notes. Yeah, so I knew which pages to flip through. But this was one of the earlier house portraits that I did.
Oh, can you share it on the your station?
I'm gonna turn on the super bright light, which makes my face glow.
There we go.
But this was one in Minnesota. Yeah, so the frigid northern Minnesota person. This one's on Summit Avenue in Minneapolis, St. Paul area. But just pen lines and adding the watercolor. And I tend to pick houses that I find really intriguing architecturally or have really fun details. This one I see on Instagram a lot. It's called the DC Gingerbread House. It was actually built from a Sears catalog in like the 1920s that the guy ordered for his daughter.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, really interesting. And this was another one. So on all of these, I've kind of used the same style where I have waterproof pen lines underneath, and then I go back in and add the watercolor. But then this one I pulled out to share too, because sometimes just doing them without watercolor, you can add a lot more detail with just the pen. And so like I wasn't going to add watercolor, and so I did a lot more like detailed line work and adding texture and shadow. So this is different than what I was planning on sharing today. But I think and then this was one that wasn't a house, but just, this is kind of my style of pen line work and drawing that you can just get a lot by using lines and little textures and details that,
Yeah, that's really cool.
yeah, that come from that. So those were just a few. The thing keeps asking me to join with audio on my phone. So
Just ignore it.
yeah. And then this one I had, so usually when I do house portraits, they're really polished, I guess is the way, because if they're for a customer, usually people like them really polished and put together. But this was one I did on a vacation semi-recently in Coronado. And so this one, the lines are a bit more sketchy and like kind of broken or unfinished, but still this idea and style of putting down the line work first. So it gives you a framework to work within, but then you really add the life and color and details with the watercolor paint. Also, that area of California just had the most amazing house styles everywhere. It was a dream for sketching. But yeah, so those are some examples of what stuff usually ends up looking like when I draw.
Awesome. Those look amazing.
Thanks.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
So you said today we are doing the line work for the house that you have right next to you?
Yeah, so my printout isn't amazing, so I hope you're able to get a better color printout. But this is just a really cute house. I guess it's kind of a Tudor style. It's from, Kelly has her account at Castle and Keith, and she just shares really beautiful photos of houses that I like. And so I picked this one because it I really like the details, like the stonework, and it has these cute windows, but I'm a sucker for houses too, and they have this greenery crawling up over them. And
yes.
Yeah, like want that on my house someday. But I figured this gave a lot of different techniques and details to have fun in drawing and demonstrating, but also I think I can finish it within an hour. We'll see.
Cool.
Yeah, and then these were, so do you want me to share like the supplies?
Sure. I'll be dropping the reference image in the chat as well so that everyone can see it.
Yeah.
Quick
Also, your phone, you can go to her account, and I think this photo is only from a couple months ago, so it's right there on their Instagram.
Cool.
Yeah. So this is a watercolor paper sketchbook. The Etcher one is amazing. I just want to share, I've used that. I'm using a slightly different one because I'm going to be doing the watercolor on it later. And the Etcher paper was so nice, it just took longer to dry. And so using this one, and so this is about, I think, a 5.5 by 8 size. I tend to like drawing smaller, that's just me. And then these are the pens that I really recommend using. So these are Pigma Micron pens made by Sakura. I think that's how you say it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've never actually heard the name pronounced, and so I always wonder if I'm saying it right. And the reason I really like these pens is the tips are super, super fine, but they give a really nice dark black ink. They come, you can see in these different tip sizes. So like this is a bigger, let's do this. So like this is the 08 versus the one I usually start drawing with. This is the 01. And so you can see, and then this is the 005, which is a very fine detailed pen. So I like using these because they're waterproof, and using different line weights can add a lot of character and detail to a drawing instead of trying to just use one throughout the whole thing. And they're waterproof, so when you go over them with watercolor, they won't bleed, which is super handy.
Yeah. Kitty in the chat says that if I'm reading this correctly, they are pronounced Sakura.
Okay.
I think.
Sakura?
Yeah. Sorry if I butchered that, Kitty.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, I've always thought I should actually look up like a video sound clip of the name being pronounced just to make sure I'm saying it right. And then I just have a basic mechanical pencil. I like using drawing pencils, but the magic of mechanical is the tip always stays sharp. So if I'm sketching fast, it helps. And then this is just a kneaded eraser. I think any kind of eraser you like will work, but I like the kneaded ones because I can get these fine little weird
points with them.
Yeah, and erase. So that's all of the supplies. Are we ready to dive in or?
Yes, we are.
Okay, here we go, guys. We're drawing a house. So the first thing whenever I start is I take a moment to really decide, this sounds silly, but to really decide what I'm drawing and kind of absorb what I'm looking at. Because I have started things before, and without doing that, things don't end up centered on the paper, or it just helps make decisions later. So for this one, I really like just the main house. I'm going to ignore this vine thing over here. I'm going to ignore these trees in the background. I'm really just going to maybe do some of this greenery in the path, and then just the outline of the house. And it so happens that this is about the size I'm going to put on the paper, but whatever the size of your picture, I'm going to show you how you can take measurements to size it up or down so that it fits whatever size you want. And then for me, I always start deciding where the base of the house is going to be. On this one, it kind of angles down. Like you can see this foundation over here. If you draw your pen across, it angles on a slope a little bit. But just for my starting reference point, I'm going to start this. I'm going to decide this is the baseline that I'm going to kind of anchor on the paper, and I'm going to measure everything from there. And so I'm just going to take, I'm going to decide I want it to start at about right here. I'm going to draw one line across, and I want to leave about that much room on either side of the paper. And that's just rough starting point. I'm not measuring anything. And one trick I've found with a sketchbook or a paper, if you want to help with drawing straight lines, if you take the side or heel of your hand or finger and you run that along the side of the paper and just hold your pen still, so you kind of lock your wrist and do this, that will help you draw a straight line if you're referencing the edge of the paper.
Yes.
Very helpful. So then measuring proportions, the wonderful trick about this is that if you're sketching or anywhere, you don't need a ruler. You just use your drawing utensil as your measuring point. So, and then everything is done in ratios. So for example, I'm going to measure again from that baseline up to the bottom of this trim. And for me, it's like, okay, it's about that. So then if I want to know how wide this is, it's about 1.5 width. So then I'm going to measure, I'm going to like make up a measurement here, if that makes sense. Not a little more. So hopefully this is making sense, but what I'm doing is I'm creating a rough reference point.
Yeah.
Look at the ratio of how wide versus how tall the house is. It's a bit high. It's hard to do this too and focus on explaining this while I'm also talking to you.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
But I think that could go a bit higher.
But it's really neat that you share that tip because I think it really helps with sticking to proportions and making sure that what you are drawing ends up looking proportional to what you are hoping it will end up.
Yeah, and the big thing, and we'll talk about this later too about doing, that's probably good enough. I don't aim for it looking exactly like the house, because I think part of the charm of house portraits is that it has a bit of your personal touch and character, and I don't want it, for me at least, I don't want it to end up looking like an architectural drawing. So I'm not going to break out a ruler and measuring everything exactly. So if things are slightly off, it's not going to bother me that much because I want it to have a little bit of character.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so bottom part, and then the next thing for me is I want to figure out this part. So I'm just going to measure again from the bottom of the trim to that peak. And lo and behold, that's very helpful. It is, this distance is almost exactly the same. And so I'm going to measure that and go, oh, and see, I put this a little bit high. So I'm going to bump everything down a smidge.
Adjustments.
Adjustments.
I love that. By the way, people in the chat are saying that you've already shared lots of great tips.
Good.
Apparently, sakura means, or it's Japanese for cherry blossom.
That I did know, and this is really embarrassing, but I think it's because of Beanie Babies, and there was the pink bear that had the, I think it was like the Japanese represented cherry blossom. That was its name. So it dates me when I was born. There we go. So anyways, this house is definitely going to fill up this page. So this is that top point, and then kind of doing the same measuring thing. I'm going to eyeball it. I think this is about the middle. Can do really light marks. I'm just going to do a quick measure to find the middle of the house, because I think having that middle line, and again, I'm keeping my finger on the edge of the paper, and that's going to help me do a roughly straight line up the middle.
Nice.
Yep. And then to get these gable points, this is when, with houses, paying attention to these tiny details matters so much. So I don't know what you call it, the trim. This doesn't really have eaves a whole lot, but noticing that this bumps out a little bit on either side. I'm going to add that, and then I'm going to draw that line to this point that we have up here. And another thing that helps with drawing these straight lines is a couple of things, is keeping your wrist locked, because if you don't lock your wrist and you do this, that's what sometimes causes our lines to curve, versus if you keep your wrist locked and you move your whole arm, your pencil goes in a more straight line. And then the other thing that I have found really helpful is starting your pencil on this point and then looking at where you're going. So what it reminds me of was in driver's ed, when they taught you how to drive when I was like 16, they told you to look at where you were going down the road, like ahead, not exactly where you wanted the car to go in the next 3 feet. Because then you're wobbling all over the road because your point of reference is really short. So I feel like it's the same with drawing. If you look ahead like this in general, your arm is just going to take you where you need to go.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah. So just so I don't get confused, I'm going to erase this. So very basic outlines. And I think what helps at this point too is our eyes do a lot for us. So if you look really quickly back and forth between this and that, like if you just glance, your eye will pick up pretty quickly if you've got a proportion off, if that makes sense, because it kind of maps one image onto the other. And I'm looking at it, glancing back and forth, and it looks about okay. So this is our rough outline, and we're going to add the details now, which is fun. So going back to this middle line, it helps us map things out where they go on the house. So for example, I need to find, and this helps too, on the drawing reference or on your reference photo. And I do this too on a screen. Like I usually have this picture on an iPad and I just take my pencil and kind of trace along the screen. For example, I'm just going to run this down and see this is centered, this is centered. And the middle of the line runs about here. So I know that this window is close to the middle line. And then if this is the middle, this distance and this distance are about the same.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and sketch in this little, I don't know what you would call it, the front door bump out, I guess, is what that is. That looks too close. So we're going to bump that over here. And the thing with these pencil lines, you can keep them as tidy or messy as helps you. I tend to remember as I'm drawing, like here, I keep readjusting this. I tend to remember where my final line is, and that's the one I'll go over in pen later.
Mm-hmm.
But like having multiple lines here would confuse you. Just erase as you go, but I'm kind of trying to go fast so that we get this done in time. So looking at this reference line again, that goes here. So this ends at about up here. And I'm going to roughly draw in the slope. I'm not worrying about these pencil smudges. It's the magic of pencils. We can erase them later as need be. But I'm going to start roughing in different faces. So we're going to say this is about where the steps come down. The door. Again, the middle line for this, and noticing that this little gable ends right above there.
Yeah. So all your lines become a point of reference for future lines.
They do. Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. So that's why I tend to take a bit more time on these bigger ones and make sure that those are right, because everything is getting referenced against those. And with houses, like, it's really fun drawing a house because I feel like as I'm drawing it, I discover the symmetry and how they measure things up. So for example, if I just looked at the picture, I wouldn't realize that like this and the window are kind of on either side of the middle line. But then when I draw it, I realize, oh, there's the balance that they put in and symmetry. So I'm not worrying about these lines being super straight because when I go over them in pen, I can do that. I will say if it helps you draw them straight, I guess you could use a straight edge.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, but that's just my comfort zone. But I would recommend if you really want to keep the feeling of a hand-drawn house that you can maybe do the pencil lines with a straight edge, but then when you go over them in pen, just do it freehand. Because you'll still get that little bit of a, not a wobble, but that bit of a human touch, I guess, to it that keeps it from feeling like an architectural drawing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm drawing this little window up here. And as I'm doing this, I'm still glancing back and forth a lot. I'm not going through measuring all of these because, like I said, I do want to make sure I get through this in time and get to the pen work and leave enough time for that.
Awesome.
But
I'm sure though, since you do this quite a bit, that has given you practice. So your eye gets to recognize more of where certain shapes and lines would lie on your piece of paper without having to measure constantly.
yeah, I think at the beginning when I was first drawing, when I was first drawing houses, everything got measured within an inch of its life. And part of it is when I first got into drawing, I was really, I did portraits a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think portraits just require you to be very exact in your details.
Mm-hmm.
So when I started drawing other things, it was good for me to learn to loosen up a bit and not have everything be an exact representation, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So part of it for me is just getting to a point where I'm okay with things not being as perfect, which is hard because I probably have more perfectionist tendencies than I like to admit.
I can definitely relate to that.
A lot of artists do. Fun note on these doors. These drove me crazy for a while until I realized that they're mostly straight lines with just with a half circle on top. So for example, like I do the lines just straight down like this first, and then I kind of mark where about the top of that door is, and then you just do this. And it helps keep the integrity of the shape, I guess, because mine would always end up a little wonky, but just breaking it down into the shapes, this feels a bit tall. But And the greenery, I tend to put in stuff like the greenery so I remember when I go over in pen line, I can start moving kind of quickly. So I map stuff in with a pencil just so I remember to put it there. Um, but it doesn't necessarily have to be accurate. It's just helping me remember. So for example, like this trim goes all the way across. If I didn't put the greenery here, there's a really good chance my brain would just draw a straight line across with the pen and then I can't erase it.
Right.
Stuck. So, which isn't helpful. So putting in the pen lines at time. So a lot of this is just markers and to glance back and forth. And things like this, I just take pencil, measure up. Okay, that's in the same spot at this point. References there. So this is about where it's going to be. We aren't dealing a lot with perspective on this house. Kind of helpful, but I probably people will not agree with me in this, and that's okay. I've taken lessons on perspective, but honestly, I feel like too a lot of it is if you use these reference points, you can kind of fake perspective.
Yeah.
Because like this, you know, you don't need to know where the vanishing point is for the roof here. If you know that this tags in roughly there,
yep.
You can go over. And so that is like my quick cheat if I'm out and about.
Yeah,
and,
that is so true.
Yeah. So
something also that I learned about angles was to mimic the angle over the reference with my utensil.
Oh.
And then lock my wrist and just move the arm towards my drawing. And that's how I would be able to see on my drawing paper where that angled line should go. And then I would follow that.
That's a really good idea. Yeah, so all of those, I'm looking at this, and this part of the house is, I think I measured this too tall, but just bump things up a little bit. And then this window. So we're almost to the point of putting in pencil lines here. I'm not going to draw in the stone detail right now. That would just be a lot of erasing.
Yeah.
So when we get to that with pen, we can tackle it. But otherwise, I think that is everything. So rough pencils at this point, are there any questions before we dive into the pen part?
I don't think there are specific questions about your drawing, but if there are, please type them in the chat. I remember one of my art instructors telling me, actually June Pierre, I don't know if you all know them, know him, June Pierre Shiosawa. He's done some stuff with Etcher, but he told me that if your basic line drawing is really good, especially of a house or some other architectural building, then you can go in afterwards and paint it, add the paint without looking much at the reference. And it's making me think of how you're working right now, Megan. And someone asked, when traveling, do you sketch the house or take a photo and draw from home?
I do both. I like to sketch on site as much as possible, but these finished ones, like, I'm feeling bad. I'm moving really quickly right now. But like something like this, if I was really taking my time, would probably take about 3 hours. And it doesn't work to sit in front of a house for that long. So that one I showed from Coronado, I think I did the pen outlines while sitting in front of the house, and then I went home and painted it. And a lot of my like more finished house portraits are like that. Yeah, so that's what I do. But if I'm really trying to urban sketch and just capture on site, I just have to give up capturing detail and precision and just have fun doing it. But I think I tend to move a bit slowly compared to other people I've seen paint and draw houses, and that's just me. So I've kind of accepted that if I'm going to do a complete house portrait, I need to plan on doing some time at home on it.
Gotcha. Is there anything you do to mark the stairs with your pencil, or do you just go do that with the pens?
Yeah, I probably should have done that. I don't. This is usually all I do. I think just because I've done stairs a lot, but I can do it right now. I usually mark wherever this little doorstop is inside the door. And then the thing with stairs is it's just these stacked boxes, and the watercolor later will add in these shadows underneath.
Mm-hmm.
But I usually just do it in pen, unless it's a really complicated set of stairs, like from an angle, and then I have to do it like from a 45-degree angle, then I'll do it in pencil because it's a lot of lining up.
Gotcha.
You don't want to mess up in pen. So my general go-to pen for the basic lines is the 01. And then what I'll probably use today later is the 005 for really fine details. And I usually use an 03 or an 05 for some of the heavier lines. And with this line, I just, in this one, I'm going to intentionally wobble a little bit to capture kind of the rough stone texture. And at this point, my goal is to start laying down the lines that will hold the watercolor in place. And this is when you just really trust that you did your measurements well. You can't really take these back. I do like these pens. If you keep a nice steady pressure, they just glide really well. I think in kind of some of my earlier sketches, pen, I think just line work is, and so with these bushes, this is where you can have fun with just doing like little squiggly, you can go back. Because I am planning on going over this in watercolor later, I am not stressing about getting all of my fine pen details perfect because the watercolor will cover some. But also, like I said earlier, I'm not wanting it to look like an architectural drawing. I want it to have some life and squiggle to it.
Mm-hmm.
So with plants, I think you can just have a lot of fun noting the different textures and leaf shapes. And like you can tell, I'm not doing this exact. I'm capturing the general shapes of things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the fun of sketching, is that we aren't going for exact precision.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so kind of like the pencil, I'm going to do, like this was my anchor spot. I know it's the bottom of the house. And then these outside lines, and I'll work my way into details. This is when it's super good for me to remember this greenery, because I'm going to do this trim line, break, because I know there's greenery there. I have definitely done that before if I've forgotten to sketch things in.
Oh, me too. Even if I've sketched them in, I think line, 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 line. Oh no, I went too far.
You just get in the groove and it just happens.
Yep.
So at this point too, I think this is when I may be talking more in broken sentences, because this part for me does require more focus, because it's at this point that you start deciding how much of the detail you want to do with a pen,
Mm-hmm.
how much you want to do with paint. And what I mean by that, so there's a trim around our door. What I mean by that is there's this, like, for example, there's this wooden texture in the door. Mm-hmm. I could do that with fine pen marks, but I'm going to decide to do that with watercolor. Okay. And that can just be a personal choice. I go back and forth. Sometimes I like adding in, there's this little window here. Sometimes I like adding in detail with the pen, and sometimes I just like leaving it with the paintbrush. And I think that's just kind of developing the style that you like.
Yeah. And if you're wondering, for everyone who is joining us today, Megan will actually be adding the watercolor to this house portrait in her mini workshop, which will be happening on March 18th. So if you want to follow how she will do that, sign up for the mini workshop. I'll drop the link in the chat.
Yeah, and the fun part of that is there's a provided copy of the line work of the house. So you could like trace it with a light box onto watercolor paper, so you can just paint along. You don't have to actually draw the house beforehand, which maybe just saves some effort.
True.
So you'll notice at this point too, like, and this is, I think, where the life really comes into house portraits, is there's details like you have this blacker line that is the shingles on the house, or I'm looking for other things here, like the gutter pipe, this little bit. And so this is where, I'm going to switch pens here real quick, just since we're talking about it. This is where deciding different pen weights. And again, this is just my style. I really like line work and line work art and having fun with it. So this is where like I'll take, instead of trying to do this maybe in watercolor, I'll take this heavier pen and draw in those
yes,
roof shingles, and just instantly having that heavier line, it adds something. And I'll come back to that a bit later, but that was just an example of why I keep these two multiple sizes of pens, because when everything is the same weight, and by weight I mean like heaviness or thickness of the line, it can cause it, I feel like, to just be a bit flat.
Yeah.
But also it can be a style, because if you see like a really beautiful drawing that's super intricate and detailed all in the same pen weight, there's also a beauty to that.
True. So true.
Real quick on. These straight lines always make me a little bit nervous.
Just remember driver's ed.
Driver's ed and a locked wrist. And if there's a little wobble, that's okay. So there's our roof. And I know I use the word detail a lot, but it is really these details that our eye picks up on details, I feel like, without us even consciously knowing. And so we can tell when something is a little bit off or missing. And so spending that time observing whatever you're drawing, oops, I made that a bit bigger than that, but we can fix that. Yeah, it just captures the character and life of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's see. Do this. Okay, this is fun. I have a thing. I love windows. I love drawing and painting windows. So, and here's why, is because I'm just gonna do, windows have so much depth and detail, and they can add so much fun. So I'm drawing just the cutout of where the window is in the actual wall. And then the thing with windows and often doors is paying attention to all these little lines and how they're receded into the wall. So for example, the top of this window actually starts down here. So I'm going to draw this little corner in like this. And this is where you can tell quickly too, like perspective and depth, because we can tell we're down and looking up a little bit. And that's why we're seeing this part of the window and not this edge. And capture those things in your drawing. And I'm going to do just the slightest whisper of a window frame here, more for guidance, because probably going to do that in paint later. Sometimes I don't block in the panes like this with pen. I do it in pencil, but this is a fine enough detail. I think I want to do it with pen. And so capturing little things like this will really help. Will help bring that touch of realism, I guess, to your house portrait. Same with these shutters. Is there anything more charming than shutters on a house? But adding these in, and you can see the wood details. I'm going to lightly put those in. Let's judge that one a little bit. But so they're lightly in, and then what I'm going to do is with the same pen, because the line doesn't need to be really thick, I'm going to put a little bit of shadow there and a little bit of shadow there and there. And again, it gives that instant sense of a bit more depth.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing how to do that for me is just a lot of observation. But also, I guess I could have said this at the beginning, is when I start a house portrait, I usually pay attention to where the light is coming from. Mm-hmm. The house will give you clues on that. So you can tell it's like, there's not some strong shadows, but there's this little bit of a shadow under the eave, under the door here, some here, and then especially this. You can kind of, to me, and then where the shadow is under these shutter doors, so you can tell the light is probably coming this way, down, and a little bit from the upper left. And so if, as you're drawing, you're wondering where, oh shoot, I totally just did that the wrong way. So we will just go over and not worry about it.
Yeah.
Because paint can help blur out some of those lines a little bit. But anyways, doing that will help guide where to put those heavier lines. And for me, I like adding them with the pen at this part. Also, it's something that you can choose to add with just paint. And I usually do a bit of both, honestly. I usually do a little bit with pen and then with paint shadows later. We've got our 3 panes here. And this is something I was saying with windows. There's these fine, the cross sections. Sometimes I just draw the squares in pencil and then add the details with watercolor. But I think just this time I'm going to choose to go ahead and draw in
with the pen.
With the pen. And again, that's up to you, like how much you want the 2, 3, 4, how much you want the pen to bring the detail and how much you want the paint.
See, that's where I would have just gone over my lines and afterwards thought, oh no.
Yeah, those reference lines are helpful. So window, and again, it looks like there's a little bit of shadow here. So I'm just going to add it a little bit with the pen. And you can see there's the same amount of like heavy shadow in here, but I'm not going to do that part with the pen. I am going to leave that for paint later because that's just personal style choice at this point. Window box. If anyone has questions, I can probably talk a little bit. I can do some of this a little bit mindlessly.
Okay, so with greenery in trees, how do you decide what to add and what to exclude? For example, the shrubs right in front, obviously you included this time, but it seems like there isn't room for the trees on the left. Do they detract from the house if you include them?
I think it's personal choice. So you're right. I didn't really leave room on this. I'm drawing this probably bigger than I usually would because I'm trying to make it more visible to the camera. It's been just style choice for me. I think I liked, when I first started drawing houses, I was really focused on drawing the house as kind of really as a portrait. So as its own little person is a weird word, but as its own focus. Because like often when you do a portrait of a person, you're just focused on their face, maybe their shoulders. And I like the idea of treating a house that way, of because usually I saw house portraits done as like an entire landscape. And I really like the idea of treating the house just as its own subject. So when I first started drawing houses, I think just that led me to leave a lot of the background details out. And so it was just personal style choice. Also just nothing, I do kind of like these misty trees in the background. So if I was going to include anything, I probably would have included those. But for me, I like just the look of the house being front and center. When I've done commissions and portraits for other people, I very often end up including trees or more greenery because they have meaning to the person whose home that is. But for me, so often I really like the cleanness of drawing just the house itself.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And right now you're using the 01 pen still?
This is still the 01. Yeah, I'm trying to get in enough of these details so we can move on to using the heavier pen and the lighter one for the stonework. So I'm just trying to get this done so we have time to add those things in.
Yeah. Another question. Do you prefer cold press or hot press? Ramona finds that her lines come more squiggly than what she wants them to when she uses cold press.
Oh, well, confession, I have yet to use hot press paper, but I'm very intrigued. This paper is pretty smooth. The Etcher sketchbook was also smooth. So I think I have found more, for me, it's more the texture of the paper. To my rough understanding, cold press maybe has more of a tooth to it than hot press.
Yeah.
So I could definitely see that being the cause of that. I've also found like when I draw in sketchbooks that are meant not for watercolor, just for pen and paper, like your pen just glides so much easier. I'm sure that has a role to play as well. But it's on one of my to try list things this year is to try hot press paper and see the difference. So sadly, that's all I know on that subject. Is not a lot.
Fair enough. I've found that it really depends on how squiggly or not I want my lines to be. So with the hot press, it's less squiggly. It's easier to get darker lines that aren't as squiggly, because when I go lighter on them, on the cold press, they'll look straighter because I'm not pressing in as much. But I don't know. Then again, I think it's up to your style, but the pen definitely doesn't catch as much onto the texture of the paper if it's a hot press.
I've also found so I used to be, because I don't like wasting, I used to make these pens last so long and then realized that my lines would get rougher and sketchier because they would just be running out of ink and the tips would get worn down. And so I finally realized if I wanted to avoid the frustration of that, I just needed to keep making sure that I was using fairly fresh pens. If I was drawing on rougher paper. I'm also kind of picky about sketchbooks. And so like this one is really nice watercolor paper, but it has a smooth texture, and the same with the Etcher one. So
Yeah.
that helps too, is like, if you know, I know that my art style is ink pen with watercolor. And so I need a paper that's going to allow me to draw enjoyably while also be good painting paper. So back to these steps over here. So this is why I kind of just let them do their thing, because we have this little lintel step and then you know that they're going to keep doing this. So I just keep stair stepping down.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, well, nice to note, they're going to get covered up by these railings a little bit. So I'm not worrying too much about getting the edges accurate. I think I may have added one more than needed to be there, but there's this, the stone comes down here, and then we've got this part. So after I'm going to add in just some rough stones along the edge that are here. And some greenery squiggly lines.
What sketchbook are you currently using?
This is horrible. Another word I don't entirely know how to pronounce, Mule. It's a German brand. And I've really, really liked their sketchbooks. If I use watercolor, the paint flows really well. But the pages don't warp or wrinkle. The paper's smooth for pen ink. And they're a good price point. So that's what I've used. I say I really did like the Etcher one too. For the same reasons, just for some reason, and I think it's probably because you have more cotton content in your paper, which is lovely. It just took longer to dry. And so I'm not using it today because I wanted to make sure when we did the workshop, I had enough time to dry, for the paint to dry. Because I know some people, if they're doing watercolor demos, they use a hairdryer to speed up the paint drying, but I don't own a hairdryer. So switching pens now. I'm doing my, and you can tell this is a little bit rough. That is the heavier one. And sometimes, like we added a little bit of depth under the shutters there. I'm going to do just a smidge here under this trim board because you can tell it's a bit heavier. That's going to have paint added to it. I'm going to do a little bit under these steps. I use the heavier pen weights to either add shadow or to do a heavy outline of something. And the outline is maybe a bit more of a style thing. I sometimes do it on my houses because I like the look. I don't think I'm going to do it on this one. And now, wrong. Here's the fine pen, the 005. This is the one, I think, using it. Oh, I totally forgot the railings. That was what I was going to use for the heavy pen. So the railings, you could add with watercolor. To me, I have found it is totally worth just doing them in pen because you get these nice, clean, straight lines and you can paint over them. And it just makes life easier.
Yeah. And for your straight lines, you didn't use a ruler, right, to get them straight?
No, these are no rulers. I say the only time I've used a ruler is if I'm doing a large house portrait and there's like one huge long continuous roof line that goes for like 8 or 10 inches. I will sometimes use a ruler for that, for the pencil guidelines. But again, I go over it with pen without a ruler because I don't want it to look. And if you play with it at home, if you start doing some lines with a ruler with an ink pen and then you do others by hand, you'll really quickly notice the difference. You'll be able to notice really quickly which ones are hand drawn and which ones are done by your pen. So here we go. Got that. Back to this 005. I like detail work. It's partly why I get into houses because there's such lovely detail. So I like using this one for stuff like the stonework or these adding a little bit of texture for the brick. You know, there's even texture on the roof. And again, then there is texture on this wall, but there's a point where you just kind of, as you're practicing, you decide that's going to look better drawn out in watercolor or this will look better drawn out in pen. Again, it's a style choice, but I'm not going to try and do this texture with a pen. I'm just going to let it be. But I am going to try and get this stone texture and detail and maybe a little bit in the brick. A trick I will say with the brick is, I'm going to try and do this, is do these little parallel lines. Because if you pay attention to brick, you'll notice that there's mortar cracks in between. So if you just do single lines, your eye will pick up that it doesn't look quite right. Versus if you do these little, at least for me, I think it looks more realistic.
Yeah.
A little more.
That little space between each brick because of the whatnot.
And I'm not doing this because I'm going to like try and capture this detail in watercolor. It's just too fine and fussy for that. But I think the fun part of doing pen work under paint is even if a lot of that pen work gets covered up, the layers of it still add something subtle to your drawing. Roof texture, I like to do kind of these fine horizontal lines.
They're broken, aren't they? They're not.
They're broken up. And then I just do some hash marks here and there. So nothing even. I used to try and do things really precise and even and then realize it didn't look quite right to my eye. And I think that's because in nature, there's very rarely perfect lines.
Yeah.
But textures, trees, shrubs, there's no perfect straight lines. There's no perfect circles. There's no perfect triangles. And so having some intentional brokenness and roughness in your lines actually adds things. And this is fun where as I'm looking at the picture, I'm capturing my eyes picking up details again. So there's kind of this like fun, this is back to the 01 pen. There's this fun wrought iron metal work on the window basket. I'm gonna add that in. And if I can't entirely see it, I'm just gonna make it up a little bit. Back to the 05 and brickwork. So with, stonework, I think if I'm being more accurate. With stone, there's usually these fun detailed stones around the window.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like with the brick steps, leaving space in between. And I'm not, you can tell I'm not perfectly capturing each stone as it is in the drawing. I'm just doing it roughly. And then in this area, where maybe some of this stone has broken up, I'm going to put pencil lines to remind myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go through and just lightly start adding in stone like this, and maybe just some broken lines to show
the hint of stones.
Hint of stone and mortar, because I'm going to come back with watercolor later. And this is kind of like that one sketch I showed in that little sketchbook of the house, but it had a lot more pen detail.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of like at this point where I decide like I could color in these stones and do cross hatching and give them depth if I wasn't going to add watercolor to this drawing.
Right.
But because I am, this is all I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself just some texture outlines. And the thing with stone is kind of breaking up. There's
cool. And to remind everyone, when Megan says that she'll be adding this with watercolor later, as in later, she means during her mini workshop on March 18th. So don't forget to sign up. I'll be dropping that link in the chat.
Yeah. I know we're getting close to the time, but like this is kind of the last stage. Like I'm going to add detail. I'm going to fill in the stonework here and on the chimney. Also the part where just taking your eraser and clearing your pen lines. Another benefit with these pens is they dry super fast.
Oh yeah, they do.
And so you usually, if you wait like 15 seconds, you do not have to worry about smudging your pen lines, which is helpful.
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to go ahead and do the heavy outline that I think is just a style thing I like doing sometimes. And so I'm going to grab, sorry, my table's like shaking, the 03. And what I like doing sometimes is I take the heavier pen and I go completely around the outside of the entire house portrait. And I think I got this idea from looking at the work of Alphonse Mucha, the Art Nouveau artist. Mm-hmm. Probably a lot of people have seen. And I noticed that him, and actually Manet too, in his work, they do these heavy outlines around their subjects, which if you're trying to draw realistically is a big no-no because that just doesn't happen in real life. But stylistically, I like heavy lines. They just bring things to the front.
Yeah.
And I just kind of like that look. Again, treating this not as doing a landscape of a house, but really as a portrait. And so, and this is not something you have to do. Like maybe this is a look that you're like, oh, it's ruining it. But You can kind of tell I wish there was a way to do it before and after on Zoom. See, it has this like oomph, it's just popping forward.
Yeah.
Each thing that you outline will feel like its own separate element. So I could have just carried this line around the bush and not done this part, but by doing this part of the bush too, it's popping that bush forward. By outlining this part, it's popping that part off the house. And I think that's kind of the fun part too, is like, I'm not going to outline the windows or any of this because I want that to stay on the plane, all on the same plane together. But this is something I sometimes do with my house portraits just because I like the style. But
yeah, it adds so much to it too.
It's really different. Yeah. And like I said, I know that's a style thing. I really enjoy it because I enjoy line work, but I will keep tootling along and filling in stonework. But if anyone had questions, I can probably do this a little bit.
Awesome. So what kind of lead were you using, or what is the hardness of the lead in your pencil?
2B, I think, in the pencil.
Awesome.
I mean, seriously, I think these were just like a pack of 4 that I picked up for like $5. Because and I don't press hard when I'm doing pencil, so it does help with the erasing later. Yeah. Also, I have heard that different papers behave better or worse with erasing. This paper seems to do pretty well, and the Etcher Sketchbook did well with erasing as well. So I know that's maybe back to our conversation about pen lines as well. Depending on the paper you use, you may run into problems erasing smoothly or having the paper pill if you work it a whole lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But.
Priyanka, I'm so sorry if I butchered your name, but they asked, how do you find motivation? Do you draw every day? They take a holiday and then, in quotations, forget how to paint.
Yeah, it's been a mix. So I think when you just draw for fun, my motivation stayed pretty consistent because I could just draw whatever caught my interest at that moment. Mm-hmm. Once I started having an illustration business, you kind of lose that freedom, but you also get the privilege of drawing for people and clients and having work. But yeah, I mean, there'll be some weeks where all I am doing is drawing houses, and maybe they're houses that don't interest me, but they're meaningful to someone else. So I think kind of last summer, I realized what I needed to do was I couldn't fill up all of my time with commission work. I needed to leave time every week. I call them my Friday fun sketches. Because I started leaving time on Friday to just play. And that's actually one of these in here was during a period when I was drawing a lot of houses. I'm like, I'm tired of houses. So I just painted a cockatoo for fun.
Oh, cool. I love that.
Super sketchy. I played with the watercolor. There's splatters everywhere. But that was my Friday fun sketch just to get, I think, that renewed motivation. And like right now, I'm trying to learn some new techniques. And so part of it, I think, is just the discipline to build in time to do stuff that I'm really excited to do. Also, my degree was in graphic design, and I had about an 8-year degree career in graphic design. Mm-hmm. I realized during that time too that I think people get this idea with creative jobs that you're just always excited and inspired, and it's not true. It's like any other job. There's days where you just show up and you do the work that you have on your plate and you do it to the best of your ability, and then there's other days where you just overflow with creativity. And I know some people are different, but that's just me. I just realized at some point I'm like, there's just going to be days where practice like this pays off, because even if I'm not super excited and motivated, my hand and my eye know what to do because I've done it a lot. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of, I think, just giving yourself time to draw and explore the things that you really want to. Following other people on Instagram or other artists is really inspiring to me too, because I see new things that people try. I'm like, oh, I never thought of that. I want to try that as well. I'm also a big nature hiking outdoor person. And I think if I just go on walks in my neighborhood or hike or sit in my garden, there's always, I think once you start drawing stuff as an artist, you're always seeing more stuff that you want to try drawing or painting.
Yeah.
And it kind of, I've heard a lot of people say that, like once they took up the hobby of painting or drawing, everything starts becoming a subject. And so then you kind of can't keep up with all of the inspiration that you want to do.
Yeah, I could relate to that.
Yeah. So, and also real quick, so you can see the difference of using the 05 pen to do the work versus if I'd done it in the 01, which is all these lines, it adds this something.
Yeah.
Good.
And Priyanka said that it does make sense. Basically, they have to draw for them and what they want.
Yep. And like I said, I think it's different if it's a hobby versus when it is your job.
Mm-hmm.
I feel guilty when I was like I get to illustrate and draw things for a job. I should be always so excited. And it's like, at least that's just not my nature or most human nature. I think there's always days you just show up and do what you need to do.
Yep.
So
That is so true. One last question. Do you have an Instagram hashtag that you would like participants to use?
oh,
Or should they just tag you?
Maybe tag me, because I can't think up of a good, clever hashtag right now.
And what's your Instagram?
It's, here, I'll write it down. It's hey there dot chickadee. That's my business name. I like birds, but also my grandpa used to call me, he'd say, hey there, chickadee. And that was what that's where the business came from. But it's there. And there are mostly accurate.
Yeah, no, it looks really good. And all those details, the different weight of lines, it just adds so much to it.
And that's, gosh, I fell in love. So I did most of all of my portrait work and like in high school and college, all I did was pencil. Pen really scared me because it's permanent.
Mm-hmm.
So I could always smudge, erase, blend. But I just really, once I started playing with these, I think my dad just gave me a pack of these like in my stocking at Christmas. And I started playing with them and I fell in love with pen work and ink art. Just for that reason, because of the cleanness, but you can get so much layer, depth, detail, nuance just using different weight pens.
Yeah. By the way, Johnny in the chat said that I guess their uncle was a rock mason. If you find the major rocks used by mason, the others are fillers. So with rock walls, copy a few of the major rocks, you capture another level of detail.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Good to know.
I always learn something from the people who participate and join us. So you all are awesome. Thank you so much. We would love to see your artwork, so please share with us if you followed along today or if you try it later on. Use the hashtag @YourMiniWorkshop, and that also, by the way, enters you into a giveaway every month. And don't forget to go check out Megan's Instagram. Hey there, chickadee. It's in the chat. We would love to hear your feedback, so I dropped the link for the feedback survey in the chat again. And don't forget to sign up for Megan's mini workshop to add the watercolor to your house portrait.
And thanks for all the good questions that make me actually think through what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you, Megan. People are saying thank you, beautiful work.
Thank you. And thanks it's, especially with COVID, it's just fun, even if this is virtual, to do something like this with people in a virtual sense.
Yeah, definitely. I had a lot of fun. And I hope we see you all in Megan's mini workshop and in future live demos. Awesome. Until then, bye-bye. Okie doke.